The Beggar Maid, written by Dilly, read by Annie Aldington. The moral right of the author has been asserted. Chapter 1. Threadneedle Street, London, 1887.
Can you spare a copper, mister?
Charity held out her hand to the gentleman in the city suit, who was hurrying towards the imposing colonnaded entrance of the Bank of England. He ducked his head down, eyeing her warily beneath the brim of his bowler hat, as he quickened his pace and strode past her.
"A halfpenny, then,"
she shouted after him.
"Bloomin' old miser."
She shivered as a bitter east wind whistled between the buildings, picking up bits of straw and scraps of paper and flinging them about like a naughty child having a tantrum. She cupped her mittened hands around her mouth and blew on them in an attempt to bring back the feeling. Her fingers and toes were numbed by cold, and hunger gnawed at her belly. She'd eaten nothing since the previous evening, when supper had consisted of a crust of dry bread and a cup of ice-cold water from the communal pump. Duxfoot Lane, where she and her grandfather lived in a basement room in a dilapidated terraced house, was not the sort of area where anyone would want to venture in daylight, let alone after dark. The damp cellar, with fungus growing from the walls and water seeping through the flagstone floor at high tide, offered the most basic shelter to a constantly changing assortment of itinerant Irish, immigrant Jews, and anyone who could afford to pay the landlord for a night's lodging. It was the last stop before living rough underneath railway arches, or facing the final indignity of the workhouse. Charity had grown hardened to the privations she suffered daily, but her rebellious spirit refused to accept that this was the way it would always be. She supported her ageing alcoholic grandfather as best she could, and had done so since the age of 8, when begging on street corners evoked some sympathy in the hearts of passers-by. Now, at 16, she was only too well aware that men looked on her in a different way. The offers of money she received were rarely unconditional, and she had to choose the time and place where she importuned the better off with great care. The bustling world of finance in the city was as safe as any area, and safer than most. She spotted an older man as he emerged from the Monument Station, with a leather document case under one arm and a tightly furled umbrella in his hand. His greying beard and air of respectability made him a likely target, and she sidled up to him with an appealing smile.
"Good day to you, sir. Would you have a halfpenny to spare for a cup of tea, please?"
she added hastily, when he stopped and gave her an appraising look.
"I ain't used to begging, sir, but misfortune has come upon my family, and I'm an orphan with an ailing grandparent to support."
The gentleman frowned thoughtfully. "There are charities that will help such as you, young lady." She could see her chance slipping by, and she managed a weary smile.
"That's me name, sir. Charity is me name. But I've seen little of it since me dad passed away."
"And your mother?"
"Died giving birth to me, sir. Me grandpa's the only one left."
The gentleman put his hand in his pocket and took out a handful of change. He selected a silver sixpence and gave it to her. "I hope you've been telling me the truth, young lady. Don't go spending it on a new bonnet or such fripperies as young women are so fond of." She drew herself up to her full height.
"You can't eat fripperies, sir. It will feed Grandpa and me for 3 days if I'm careful. God bless you, your lordship."
She could hear the small change clinking in his pocket as he walked away, and for a brief moment she wished she'd learned to dip like the street Arabs who roamed the East End. She'd been brought up to be honest and God-fearing, and only in the direst of circumstances had she overcome her scruples and stolen a loaf of bread or a meat pie. Before the lure of jigger gin had stolen his health and loosened his grip on reality, Grandpa had instilled morality into her young mind, and she had learned how to read, write, and do basic arithmetic at the Ragged School. She tucked the coin into the top of her stays with a wry grin. Not that learning had been much help to her on the streets, but at least she could add up her takings for the day, and she knew when she was being cheated over the price of a fish supper or a dish of jellied eels. She looked round for another likely benefactor, but the clerks in their cheap suits with frayed cuffs and leather patches on their elbows were not worth bothering with. They worked long hours.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?